There was a fellow who, or a woman who decided that she was going to start dating again. She'd been married and she divorced for a while. And a friend of hers set her up with a guy, and this was not the best date. This fellow started to talk. They went out to dinner, and he talked, and he talked, and he talked, and talked, and talked. He just kept talking. And he kept talking about himself and what he did and how long he'd been working and all of these things, on and on and on. She couldn't get a word in edgewise. And finally, after 3 hours, he looked over and he said, well, enough about me. Let's hear from you. What do you think about me? Now, I know some of you dated this guy, didn't you? Well, we all have egos. In fact, that's what we're going to talk about tonight is our egos. And we kind of think of egos as one thing when they really are something a little bit different. When we think of a person as being egotistical, we think of a person who's bragging and showing off and all those kind of things. But there's another kind of egotism. There's the suffering, poor me egotism. And it's just as much ego. Ego is literally every place. In fact, Lorna and I decided to name our egos. She named hers Sam. Now that's for Yosemite Sam, you know, that character who has the 2 guns and a big hat and shoots. And when she goes off into ego, it's just like that. It was a very good choice. And I decided to name my ego Igor. And she said, well, why did you choose Igor? And I said, well, because ego and Igor start with the same letter. And she looked at me and said, John, I know you're not the best speller, but I have to tell you, Igor starts with the letter I. And I said, and just what do you think ego starts with? Think of that. You see, it's I, mine, me. It's all of those things. We are stuck in this ego place. So let's take a little look at some of the ego. The ego has many faces. There's one that can be jovial. It can be chatty. It can be pedantic, unsure, perplexed, worried, fearful, pouty, sad, miserable, self-pity, angry, rage, slick. And there's my favorite, argumentative. When you are argumentative, you are coming from ego. Before we get through tonight, we're going to find out how you can tell when you're in ego or when you're coming from your soul. Now, a lot of people think the ego is the devil. In fact, sometimes we even use the devil as an excuse for our ego. We can have all sorts of dragons that we think are creating problems for us, but it isn't them. That's not too bad a devil. We might try that one. Or there's my favorite devil. And of course, one of my favorite characters, you may have remembered him, a comedian that I thought was really great, was Flip Wilson. Anybody remember Flip Wilson? Well, he had his favorite line that I love, said, the devil made me do it. And we want to always think that there's something out there that is the cause of our problems or the cause of the situations we are. And every time we're in that mode of thinking, we are, of course, in ego. There was a time, speaking of the devil, when the devil had a problem. Lucifer was sitting in his office, and Beelzebub, that's his assistant, came in and he said, Lou, we've really got a problem here. He said, all of the plumbing is leaking, and it's leaking on the brimstone, and it's creating all of this steam. And we can't see what we're doing. So Lucifer says, well, just call up to St. Peter and have him send some plumbers down. He said, I can't do that. He said, why not? He said, well, you know, last month when we had the problem with the scaffolding, and you asked him for some carpenters, and you said you'd send them back and you'd pay the bill. Well, you didn't send them back and you didn't pay the bill. He's never going to send us any plumbers. He said, let me show you. Lucifer picks up the hotline. That's the only kind they have down there. Calls St. Peter, and he says, hey, Pete, this is Lou. Now, I know that I didn't send your carpenters back yet, and I know I haven't paid the bill, but please, I've got a real problem down here. Would you just send me some plumbers so I can take care of it? And I promise I'll pay both bills, and I'll send your carpenters back and your plumbers back. I absolutely promise. Trust me. So St. Peter said, well, okay, I will. And the devil had a smile on his face, and Beelzebub said, you did it again. He says, but you're going to have to be careful. One of these days, St. Peter is going to sue you. Devil smiled and said, and just where would he get an attorney? We have all of these ideas about things, and really the stuff that we're facing is not out there. It's not in the things. And the ego is nothing more than what I would call a spoiled brat. It is that part of us that is a spoiled brat. It does not think from our soul. It thinks from its own selfish point of view. The ego doesn't trust anything except itself. It needs to be busy doing or thinking, and it doesn't like meditation. Guess what part of you doesn't like meditation? It is, of course, the ego, because it's afraid. It's afraid that in that state somehow it'll be lost. In fact, the key to the ego is fear. The ego experiences fear and conditional love. Conditional love. It is incapable of handling unconditional love. It looks for substitutes, because every part of us wants love. That's the natural part of the universe. But the ego looks for substitutes. It gets power and justification, prestige, drugs, food, sex, and control. And then it becomes addicted to these things that it needs so badly, when of course it needs none of those. What it only needs is the only thing that will ever satisfy it is unconditional love. But it doesn't have that, because it's making the conditions. And the ego has a hidden agenda. It's very hard. The ego can sound very good. It can be very nice. It can be very kind. It can do things for other people. It can give things, but it always has a string attached. When someone else is operating from ego with you, or when you're operating from ego with them. If the ego says things like, it's not stealing, it's a big company. They won't miss that little pencil or that or the other thing. Or, I never did anything like that. Always in denial. It's only a little white lie. I've wondered about white lies. Are there other kind of lies besides white lies? Are there black lies and brown lies? Maybe they're like, in the martial arts, you get different belts, a brown belt for a brown lie or black belt, I don't know. But all lies are lies. They're just departures from what we know to be true. Well, I didn't want to go to that party anyway. It's always justifying, always making excuses for how we feel. Of course I'll respect you in the morning. One of the ego's favorites. And this is my favorite of all times. After all I've done for you. Let me tell you that when anyone says that, they have done nothing. They're just disappointed that their little scheme didn't work. When you do something out of unconditional love, it makes no difference what the other person responds. It doesn't make any difference, whether they like it or don't like it or what. When you're expecting something back, it is conditional and not unconditional love. You could describe the ego as energy going out. But here's the thing. We all come from our soul. That is where all the energy we have, if that energy were cut off, we would be unable to function. And we have given the ego free will, the ability to choose. And it can choose something good and wonderful. The ego can choose some good things. And it can choose something terrible or awful. And all that you see in the world that you don't like is based on ego, not necessarily yours, unless you're involved in it, but it is ego that is the problem in the whole world. If we were operating from soul, if we were actually operating from soul, there'd be no wars, there'd be no poverty, there'd be none of the kind of problems we're facing. So let's take a look at this little thing we call ego. And what ego is nothing. This is going to surprise you maybe. It is nothing but a series of beliefs that were created, that you created over a period of time. Ego is not something that came with you, although I think it starts fairly early. My best guess is that the ego starts someplace in the third or fourth month of gestation and is pretty well completed by the 6th or 7th month of gestation. Because when a baby comes out, it has fear. And the only part of you that can fear is ego. So we know when a baby's born, he has an ego. Not much of one. In fact, that's what we love about babies is they have very, very little egos, very little of ego. And they're happy and they're fun and they know what they want and they ask for it and they get it. They have this wonderful way of asking, and we all respond. We guess. You know, what do they need? A bottle? Do they need their pants changed? What do they need? We're always responding to them. And that's what they expect because that's where they came from. Before they were in the womb, they came from a place where everything they wanted was always given to them instantly. And in the womb, the same thing was true in most cases. They got everything they needed when they needed it. And then when they came into this world, for a little while, they got most of their needs met. And then, of course, we civilized them. That became a problem. The ego is nothing more than a set of beliefs that you think is who you are, and you are not your ego's belief system about who you are. But all of what you do and see and act and react to is based on this filter of beliefs that we call ego. Now, the ego's function, its true function, is to be a conduit from spirit or from soul into the physical world. Everything that's physical, even if it's alive or dead, has an ego. It cannot exist. We cannot exist without an ego. It's what makes our body. The product of the ego is the body itself. In order to function in time-space, we need an ego. The ego exists in time-space. It needs time-space. It dies out of time-space. Your ego is going to die, folks. Why not get rid of it sooner? Or at least live from a different place. But your ego is going to die. That part of you that's ego is not going to be here after you make a transition into another plane. The plane that you're already in now, but maybe not aware of. The plane that you were in before you came onto this planet. The plane that you will be in after you leave it. Now, you need this ego while you're here. It's useful, it's important, but you don't need it to be running the show, and that's the problem. The ego's focus is on the past or the future. It's always worried about what's going to happen or what happened before. It does not like the present moment, and there's a reason for that. I showed you a slide something like this in one of my other lessons, but I want to reprise it because it's really important when we're talking about the ego. The ego is looking at the future and the past. And as it looks at those things, it is escaping from reality. Reality can only be found at that point where we touch the present moment. In all of eternity, there is the present moment, and the present moment is in eternity. The past and the future are outside. They're a projection outside. They're what we call the illusionary gap. There is no such thing as the future. There is no such thing as the past. The past is just a memory. The future is just a dream. The only thing that is real and true is the very present moment. This illusionary gap that we have is what causes the pain and suffering, particularly suffering. The ego is the only part of you that can suffer. If you could have a little switch on your ego and you were really in the worst way and all the worst things were happening to you and you could just shut it off, you'd feel wonderful. Instantly wonderful if you could just shut the ego off. If we could get away with losing the past and losing the future and be present to where we are right now, that and that alone is what is real. It's part of eternity. And from the point of being present, we can contact that inner part of us, the truth, the reality, as we pay attention to not what we're doing, but who we are. When who we are is more important than what we're doing, then we're contacting that center of us. We're in touch with the entire universe. But when we're focused on what we're doing, then we have a problem. And as we are focused on our being, we create more energy. If we spend more time focused on who we are and less time focused on what we're doing, we'll have far more energy to do whatever it is we're doing. That, of course, is the point. The past is history. The future is a mystery. And the present, well, that's a gift from God. And that's why they call it the present. It is truly a gift. But the idea of being able to live in the present moment is very different than what we've been taught. And yet it's a necessity if we truly want to have the kind of life that we're talking about that we want to have. It's something like this. When you're thinking about the present or when you're thinking about the past or the future, all of your energy is going out. None of it is coming in. Now, if you focus on the present moment, you start to bring energy in and you slow those wheels down. And if you continue to do that, you actually dissolve your focus on the past and the future, and all of your energy is coming into you. That's a crucial point, to understand that if you're having a hard time in your life, stop thinking about the problem. Stop thinking about what might happen. Stop thinking about what already happened and start focusing on where you are right now. That's the only real solution. The ego has tons of needs. And I'm going to show you this, and I want you to think about this maybe first in terms of other people rather than yourself. It might be just too shocking if you thought about yourself. But think about this in terms of other folks. The ego needs to win because it's a loser. The ego needs to be loved because it feels unlovable. The ego needs to be important because it feels unimportant. The ego needs to be afraid because it lacks love. The ego needs to brag because it lacks self-confidence. It needs pity because it lacks self-worth. It needs to blame because it feels guilty. It needs to justify because it's unsure. It needs to have many things to make it happy. And it's going after all those things. Now think about that first from the point of view of someone else, not yourself. And then, if you can bear it, think about how much of that list are you living in most of the time? Because as you're living in that list, you're living from the ego point and you're not living from the soul point. Now the soul, on the other hand, who you really are, doesn't need any of that stuff. It is kind and fun-loving and fearless and joyful and accepting and playful and courteous and compassionate, happy, confident, sure of itself, and shameless. That is what the soul is. Now, you operate from ego and from soul. You are operating right now, sometimes some way and some the other. You sometimes act from ego and you sometimes act for soul. Do you have a clue now as to how you can tell when you're coming from soul or when you're coming from ego? If you're angry and upset, what are you coming from? And if you're feeling joyful and fearless and things are really going good, what are you coming from? Your feelings are the key as to where you are coming from. And the whole point of everything we've taught in every one of these lessons, and certainly of this particular lesson, is your whole job is to focus on your state of being. These are your states of being, not your state of doing. We need to switch from being human doings back to being human beings. You might say, people say, well, I have an ego, or someone has an ego. That's really not true. Your ego has you in a stranglehold, dictating how you feel, what you do, how you respond to the life. Can you imagine being enslaved by something that was basically put together by the time you were 6? And we're living on that. Let's take a look at this. That big screen area up in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, let's say that that's spirit or your soul. That's the eternal you. That's where you come from. There is a pipe, a conduit, if you will, that comes out and connects to you. That pipe is the ego. That's its function, to bring energy from spirit into your mental and physical world. So that's a good thing, isn't it? Isn't that we need an ego? We have to have an ego because it is the pipe. Now, that pipe through use begins to take on ideas. It takes on different personalities. And you can have lots of different personalities, and some of them work and some of them don't. They're different ideas. I represented them here by different colors. But every so often, the ego begins to think that it's in charge. And that's when the problem happens. When the ego has all this stuff coming through and it says, aha, it's me that's supplying you with all this energy. and you go into this terrible state. What do we need to do? We need to dissolve that baby back and let it be the conduit it was supposed to be. And as we do, we come back. And who are we? We are that spirit acting in this world as a physical being. You are a spiritual being having a physical experience. And if it is not clouded by ego, it can be a great, fun experience. It's supposed to be. That's the way it was designed. One of my heroes, and one of the guys I like and have read probably 3/4 of the books he's written a lot, including his very first one, was Wayne Dyer. And I basically agreed with everything Wayne Dyer said until one of his latest books where he said, we have the job of killing the ego. I totally disagree, because I think if you kill the ego, guess what? You might as well give up the body as well, because it's the conduit. It's important. However, it's not supposed to be in charge. As I said in the beginning of this class, the ego is a spoiled brat, and it needs to be trained. It needs to be not so much overcome, but loved, if you will. Love the fear that it has away. You can try to control the ego. Number one, your soul will not do it. Your soul loves you and your ego too much to do anything to hurt him. So we really have to train the ego enough to ask for the help, and then it gets it. We have to be willing to say, yes, I'm controlled by my ego. Yes, I'm controlled by these ideas, but I want it different. I want to change it. And when we're in that mode, then the energy can come through and clean it out and give it the kind of things it wants. Now, that process takes a while. I have had watch situation. One was with a particular lady who was in the worst way. Everything in her life was going to hell in a handcart. She had lost her job. She had broken her leg. She had a settlement from an accident that she was in that was supposed to be settled years ago, and it wasn't being settled. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And she was in a class that I taught a few years ago. And I saw her a while after that class in another church and asked her how she was doing. And she was just as angry as any person you saw. She said, "You people," and she was talking to me, and she was talking about teachers. "You people say you're helping people, but you don't really help them. You just tell them a bunch of stuff. You're not helping them." And she was as bitter as a person could be. She said, "If you'd really help me, you'd lend me $2,000. I said to her, "I'll tell you what, I'd like to come over to your house next week, and I'll talk with you." What I did was I got 100 3x5 cards and 100 little envelopes that they would fit into, and 100 stamps, 100 stickers with my address on there. In fact, I even put a return sticker with her address on there. And I brought those things over to her, along with a check for $1,000. And I said, "I will not lend you any money because I just don't lend money to people. But I'm going to give you this $1,000, provided you'll do just one thing. Every single day, I want you to take one of these cards, and I want you to write 7 things that you're grateful for, just 7 things. Then I want you to put it in the envelope and mail it to me." Now, there's no excuse. I mean, she's got stamps. Everything is right there for her. And she said, "Oh, that was great." I said, "Now, if you ever get to the point where you can pay this money back, I do not want you to give it back to me. I want you to pay it forward. I want you to give it to someone else who needs some help. Is that a deal?" Well, she thought that was a great deal. And she did, and she followed through, and she wrote those cards. And they started out with 7 things each day, and then 8 or 9, and before you got it, sometimes getting 2 cards full of stuff she was grateful for. Her leg healed up. She got a better job than she had before. The suit settled for $10,000. I mean, her whole life just changed. And this was 100 cards. So that's 3 months. Her life totally and completely changed by doing just one thing, being grateful, by writing down what she was grateful for. That's all she did. And her life got better. Now, I have to tell you the back half of that story. What's this? Paul Harvey says, the rest of the story. I saw her about a year ago, and this is maybe a year after this had happened. And she was right back where she started from. Back into that pessimistic, nothing works, it's a terrible world state. I learned something by doing this. I learned two important things. Thing number one is this stuff will work for anybody. I don't care how far down the tubes you are, it'll work if you work it. But I also learned this. You cannot work it without an internal decision. You can't work it from the outside. Nobody can convince you or pay you or do anything else to get you to do this. It's got to be an internal decision, and it's forever. If you think you're going to start a gratitude journal and do it for a few months until you get a good job and things are going good, you're going to do gratitude journal for the rest of your life if you want it to work. If you're going to meditate until things get a little better and then you stop, it's going to go right back. In other words, it's a commitment, a total commitment to doing the practices that we're teaching from now on forever. The rewards are tremendously great. You can literally have a totally wonderful life if you're willing to do it. And you'll have a good life for as long as you do it. You can try it out. Say, well, I'll give it 3 months. Good. And it'll work. And if you don't try it out, of course, it won't work. And if you do it for 6 months and your life becomes wonderful and then you stop, guess what? It's going back. You will never make it. There is no making it. There is a total shift in the way you think. And there's a commitment to continue that shift. And it goes on and on and on. It's like peeling an onion. You get one layer off and things get a little bit better. You get another layer off and they get better. And if you stop, the onion grows again. You continually do it. And guess what happens when you peel an onion? There are some tears. It really is something that takes a commitment that'll let you override whatever challenges that come up, and they will come up. But yet, this is the thing that solves the challenges. Whenever you are in this state, if you're working in the state of changing from an ego point of view to a soul point of view, and you ask for things, and you look for things, and you focus your energy and your intention on things, everything that's in you that's blocking that will come up. It's got to. There's no other choice. So you may be asking for some wonderful thing. You may be asking for a better job, and you get fired because you should have quit a long time ago. But you're asking for the better job, and the better job will come. And it might take a month or two. I remember one fellow I was working with, and he was a prayer partner. I had a hard time telling him this is a good thing. He was one of these very, very nervous, had to be busy all the time people. I said, look, it's time for you to have a vacation. God has given you a 5-week vacation. Have fun. He had enough money in the bank to last for a while. If he could have just stopped worrying, and he did get a better job. So you have to be willing to trust this soul, this part of you that is who you really are. You need to know when you're coming from one way or the other, when you're coming from ego or when you're coming from soul. When you see things out there that you think are wrong, the ego wants to counteract them. It wants to solve them. It wants to change them. It wants to make them different. The soul wants to counterthink. Think differently. Find the best thing you can about that situation, or if you can't find anything good about this situation, focus on something else. Find good thought and focus on it. Don't allow that negative stuff in there for more than 15 seconds. When the thing happens, yes, you can say that word I've said a few times. When we say shift happens, I've said that kind of word. Shift, I said, right? You can say those words, that's okay. But quickly as you can, move away from that. 15 seconds is a long time, but you can switch in that amount of time and focus on what you want instead of what you don't want. What's wrong? Okay, here's how the ego maintains its grip on you. If you're doing any of these things, these are its little tools to keep you enslaved. Judgment, criticism, guilt, gossip, justification, anger, busyness. Just have to be busy all the time. Personalization and resentment. Now, these are the things that get you out of that. And in each one, we want to make the change from judgment to acceptance, from criticism to praise. We want to make the change in each one of these cases to the thing that supports the soul instead of the thing that supports the ego. And if you're willing to make those changes and make them at the point when this is happening, you will find your life changing and changing very quickly. Become aware of your state of mind when you're in it. This is the most important thing you can do. And we are going to teach in the next 2 weeks the art of pivoting. But if you've been reading the books we've said, the one about emotions, the Abraham book on the power of emotions, that is the most important thing that you need to read to be prepared to learn this process of doing this shift, doing this pivoting. That is, of all the things we teach, meditation is important and gratefulness is important. All of those things are important. But where the rubber hits the road is this ability to, right in the middle of the terrible situation, to stop it and say, I choose a different thought. That's where you begin to make the real changes in your life. By changing from the ego to the soul, we're not asking you to learn something new. We're not asking you to learn to be different. We're asking you to let go of something new. The something new is your ego. You see, your soul is old. It is far older than your ego ever was. It is eternal. And what we're asking you to do is to go back to the way that is actually natural for you. It's the way you were born to be. You've just simply forgotten it. There's nothing you need to do. There's nothing you need to learn. All you have to do is remember who you really are. There is a series of, I would call them states of being. And they start at the very lowest there. You can see with powerlessness, unworthiness, depression, rage, hatred, and they go all the way around to the top where you have gratitude, freedom, joy, etc. You can be at one place, and as you move up the scale, as you begin to move up the scale, you'll notice a little column on the left-hand side there is raising. As you raise from a lower state to a higher state, you are raising your power to attract good in your life. And the higher you go up, the more power of attraction you have. When you're down in those low states, you have very little ability to get anything accomplished. When you're in a state of depression, you can't do anything. When you're in a state of rage, everything you turn to just makes you more angry. So the object is to get yourself to a higher state. In the state of peace, you'll attract the most to you. Those top 5 positions, or 3 positions, freedom, joy, and peace, and you might want to add bliss in there if you wanted to. Those are not possible to reach by a conscious decision. You cannot reach peace by saying, I'm going to decide to be peaceful today. You cannot reach joy by saying, I'm going to decide to be joyful today. It's not a choice. Your choices stop at gratitude. You can choose today to be grateful. And if you stay in a state of gratefulness, you'll automatically, without anything done on your own, you'll be pulled up into those higher states. Just keeping yourself in that state called gratitude, or any of those higher states, you'll be drawn up to the very high ones. Remember, you can't choose them. You can say, I'm going to be joyful, but that's just your ego making you a promise it can't keep. But if you hold yourself over a period of time into these higher states like joy, you'll automatically, without even knowing it, you'll just wake up one morning and you'll feel wonderful. And it'll last for a day or whatever, and then you'll get back down again. Get back into gratefulness quickly as you can, because that'll raise you up and make you the kind of person you want to be. And also to draw the things in your life, the kind of experience that you want to draw. Being present to the present is our greatest present. Remember this guy, Nesrudin, who was looking for a key in front of his house. His friend came along and said, what are you looking for? He said, I'm looking for my key. And he said, well, where did you see it last? And he said, well, I saw it in my house. He said, what are you doing looking for it out here? And he said, because there's more light out here. Folks, there's no light out here. None. The only light out here has been brought by us. The light is inside, but we are literally blinded by it because we're unused to it. But the light is inside, and that's where we need to go to make the changes. That is where it is for every one of us. And that is what I have to say about that. I bless you all.